Deputy Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder, yeah, I think I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions about some specific ones. Deputy Dowd was no, I haven't got one. Oh, maybe it's in an envelope. Sorry, I'll put it up. Sorry. If I could ask you a few questions about the Central Remedial Clinic. What's the exact situation there? Deputy Dowd dealt with it to some extent. What's the top up and what's the amount funded by the HSE? Of the chief executives.
Just the chief executive.
Yeah.
Okay. The information they provided to the audit was that the chief executive at the time, the HSE funded element of the salary was €106,900. The CRC funded salary was €116,949. The CRC funded allowance was $19,016. Yeah. And then on top of that, then there was a contribution of 25% of the CRC funded salary to a private pension fund.
Okay. And have you any idea where that money comes from, the non-HSE funded part?
What the description, the information they provided was that the non-public funding or sources comes from CRC's own resources and not from the Exchequer. Funding of the employer pension contribution is proportionate to the salary breakdown. That was the information that they provided.
What resources does CRC have?
They didn't provide that. As I say, the purpose of this was to identify what was the lie of the land out there. What was being paid? What were allowances? Were there any travel, any other benefits?
And you don't approve of that particular top-up, do you? That means they're not complying, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. What does it matter, in your view, if the CRC is? You see, what Deputy Dowd was saying was very interesting, and it was personal. And he was saying, look, that he'd heard of them cutting back the CRC on a lot of things, where children couldn't get treatment and where disabled people couldn't get swimming lessons, etc. Have you any role in seeing, as you're funding it, that sort of activity doesn't happen if the organisation is well able to afford what it's claiming it can't?
Well, a service agreement will specify both the type and the quantum of services to be provided in return for public funding.
Yeah.
So they're not in a position or allowed to arbitrarily reduce the level of services unless there's been a commensurate reduction in public funding. What we don't have visibility of course, is what they may or may not be doing with any privately derived income.
See, I'm asking this question specifically because there's a group called the Friends and Supporters of the Central Remedial Clinic. Are you aware of them?
I would have donated to them on occasion in Clontarf and various other places.
Okay. Have you ever looked at their accounts?
I haven't.
Because, I mean, those accounts are readily available. And that particular company received 2 million lottery accounts last year. 1.9 in 2011, that's the latest accounts I have. 1.9 million in 2010. On top of that, the accounts say they have a surplus carried forward at the end of the year, that's the end of 2011, of 14 million. If those accounts are correct, which I presume they are because they're audited, by, I think it's Ernst & Young, which doesn't mean they're correct, but it means there's a good chance they're correct. They would indicate to me that that is a mechanism of funding the Central Remedial Clinic, that they're called Friends and Supporters of the Central Remedial Clinic. I can't see the channel of, I can see the connection between them. And that the Central Remedial Clinic has a source of funding which is extremely large, to which you're contributing. that it is paying its salary an extra 100,000. Presumably out of that resource. I don't know if it's got any others. There's another company called Central Remedial Clinic Devices Limited, which is a rather strange company too, and they all have common directors, by the way. There's a huge overlap in directors in these three companies. But it would seem to me that it's not defensible that a company which has a source of funds which appears to have 14 million in the bank is making cutbacks. What would you think of that?
It would certainly seem strange.
Would it be acceptable to you?
In general, no, it wouldn't be. If obviously I know little enough about the company, but
I'll give you these figures now.
If members of the public are donating to a charitable fund, presumably for the benefit of the users of the CRC, thank you. Good with that?
Maybe I'm mistaken, but you see the point I'm making?
Well, it seems in the year 2011 that none of the funds went in the direction of CRC.
Yeah.
And that in 2010, would that imply whether the donation was made or not? Yeah, about $750,000 went to the CRC.
Yeah. So it is a mechanism for funding the SRC, for the CRC.
Yes.
And there's 14 million there.
The interesting question, just on the reading of this, is that in the course of the year, they received in excess of €2 million in lottery funds.
Correct.
And in the same year, they had a surplus in ordinary activities of very nearly the same amount.
Yeah.
So certainly there are questions to be asked and answered about that.
Would that be your responsibility to ask those questions?
I'm not sure that it would be. They're not an entity to which we have a legal relationship.
But you fund them?
We don't fund the friends and supporters of the Central.
No, but you fund the Central Remedial Clinic.
Yes.
And wouldn't it be a reason for withdrawing funding if they've got plenty of money elsewhere which they're refusing to use to give children the swimming they need?
What I would need to know before reaching a view on that is what what I would need to know before reaching a view on that is what the aims and objectives of this entity are, the purposes for which it obtains these funds, whether it's legitimate for us to take the view that if these funds are available to the CRC, then they need less funds from ourselves. And I don't have any of that information at this time, so I'd be cautious about forming an opinion. But clearly, there are some interesting questions that could be derived from an examination of this revenue account insofar as it relates to 11 and 10.
Sure. I mean, I accept that you have that responsibility, Ed, but they do call themselves friends and supporters of the Central Remedial Clinic. It would be odd if they had any other mission in life, wouldn't it?
Well, there are many hospitals, both public and voluntary, would have friends groups who exist not to provide funding directly into the revenue account of the institution, but to provide patient comforts. They donate equipment, they may be organised trips and so on and so forth. So you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a direct subvention from a friends organisation into the service provider. So I don't have sufficient information to reach a conclusion, but just a cursory examination of this revenue account, particularly the relationship between lottery proceeds and surplus and ordinary activity at the end of the year, certainly raises question marks. Yeah,
and it would seem a strange time to have 14 million in the bank, wouldn't it? When there are children in need.
Indeed, it does.
Okay.
It's also what I was asked earlier about my view on salaries. The combined pay package referred to in relation to the then CEO certainly seems overly generous for an organisation of its size by comparison with any other service provider in the state.
Okay. Would you, and I'd conclude on this, provided you give me a satisfactory reply.
Fair enough.
Would you give us some assurance that you will look into that situation with the CRC?
I certainly will.
And let us know what your conclusions are.
I certainly will. And if I might just note the gender composition of the team that are with me here today.
Well, I noticed it as well, and I think it's very unfair on the male gender today. Thank you.